Welcome back to Track Talk, and we'll be doing a game of 1882. We have Grimaldus, Smurfy Day, Frankie Teardrop, and Wade Moore in this particular game. The Northwest Rebellion is pretty early, happening on the purchase of the 3, and the Trestle Bridge will be coming with a share of the GT. GT, of course, starting just outside Pile of Bones in Asanobia. Grimaldus is going to lead us off in the auction, and he's going to bid for the Northwest Rebellion. Smurfy Day, he is going for the expensive private, the Canadian Pacific. Frankie Teardrop on the Trestle Bridge, so the 3 most expensive privates have bids on them at this point. Wade Moore, he rounds us out on the sketch, so probably Grimaldus is just going to pull here, would be my guess. And he does, very quick auction. Smurfy Day, he's going to be parring the Canadian Pacific, and most likely will be parring it for 100. He actually pars it pretty low, 71 only. A little bit surprised to see that. He needs 4 more shares to float, and he will not have enough money to do it on his own. So even with this par, he cannot quite make it. A little bit surprised he didn't go for 100 if he was going to rely on people's help anyway. But we'll see if he's able to get this floated. Frankie Teardrop also gets to decide his par on the GT, and I imagine he's going to par it low enough that he needs minimal help. He pars it at 76, so I was going to rely on someone to buy an extra share for him, and he actually pars it above the CPR. I don't know if that's wise. You might be incentivized to operate after the CPR, or at least operate later than the other companies to try and get your private bought in. You have the most expensive one. Wade Moore, he is going to help Smurfy Day. Smurfy Day still does not have enough cash to float without someone else buying another share. And Grimaldus is going to round us out with the HBR. Does he have enough money to float that? No. So we'll probably see a 2-company start, unless Wade Moore just wants to spread his cash and help all the other players, but we'll see. Smurfy buying a CPR, no guarantee this floats again. Frankie Teardrop buying his GT. Wade Moore looks like he is in the business of just floating everybody else's companies. Grimaldus, he is halfway to floating. Smurfy Day, so we have our first company floated. And second, Wade Moore, is he going to help the HBR out? Looks like he does. What a generous guy. Now Grimaldus is actually getting a little bit greedy here, and he buys a CPR. So HBR may not float actually, or Grimaldus may actually be at risk of losing the presidency. Wade Moore is not going to be able to take it just yet in this stock round, but if for some reason he were able to have priority on Grimaldus into the next stock round, and he buys 2 more shares, the presidency would be up for grabs. Looks like Wade Moore is going to help him out. Grimaldus does buy his 4 shares, so that company's floated. And Wade Moore, did he buy another share? He did, so he's going to sit on 3 shares of the HBR. So everybody's playing pretty cooperatively so far. Very fast draft, or a very fast auction, and all 3 companies are managing to float. GT, I'd like to see him head towards Pile of Bones and drop a quick token there. We'll see if he agrees. Looks like he's heading to Moose Jaw instead, and maybe eventually hoping to get into Saskatoon. Not entirely clear. Looks like he's going to buy a 1-2 train and a second. He's going to have a hard time running both of these until green breaks. Could head towards, yeah, I guess it would have to be Saskatoon probably. CPR, he is laying just 1 track, leaving his options open to head north or south. HBR, he will take the 4th and final Yellow City. So this is going to make it quite hard for the GT to run both of these trains, I think. And CPR actually didn't buy a train, so he's going to be sitting on this private income and let the other players buy into the greens for him, it looks like. HBR connects with Hudson Bay, and how many trains does he buy? Probably just 1. He buys 2, so maybe looking to take care of this double dit in the next operating round and tokening in QLL, for instance, in the Pile of Bones City, for instance. He buys 3 trains, wow. All right. I don't think he's looking to dump this. He could, but it would be still a pretty healthy company. He's going to pass. Smurfy Day, 1 share for him, probably. He picks up an HBR, and the rest of the players should be, well, Wade Moore sells at the HBR, doesn't allow anybody to buy any other shares, and I guess he's going to put his money elsewhere, but he has limited opportunities to invest. The GT is going to be running 1-2 trains, so it's going to be running for less than HBR. CPR is not going to be running at all, so I understand it's a little risky to hold on to the HBR, but you're putting him into yellow, and you have worse opportunities for investment now. And it looks like he's just going to sit on his private income. So he just helped float, but this is to Grimaldus's benefit, I think. He's operating later, more likely to be able to buy in his privates, and he is now in yellow with market shares. GT, again, limited track, could lay this dit, but is going to have to token to reach it. So he just blocks himself. All the yellow cities are taken. Running just one train, as mentioned. He actually buys a third 2, and he's going to buy his 3 here, I assume. Northwest Rebellion is done. No real effect on the game. And does he buy Trestle Bridge? He does. So he's going to have a bunch of cash, but really underwhelming runs for him. And he has opened up green for the other players. CPR actually doesn't give himself a run yet again. Does he buy a train? He does not. So he's content to sit on the private income still. HBR probably linking up with Pile of Bones, if I had to guess. And he does. Does he grab that token? He does. All right, so I like that play. He can run all 3 of his trains, and he's going to have a pretty good revenue as a result. 140, he pays that out. And does he pick up a 3 train here? He does. This is going to make it hard for him to buy in his privates. He has pretty decent value privates. Is only going to be able to buy in one of these, most likely. So he buys in the cheap private, gets a money probably for 1 share, and we're into the next stock round. He has priority. Could look to dump the HBR. If he dumped the HBR, what would he start? Could look to start the QLL and then link up with Asanobia, take advantage of that track. CNR, the Northwest Rebellion has already occurred, so you're not worried about your track blowing up. You can get the control of this double dit. Not an unreasonable start. And really, those are his 2 options. Hard decision. I'm not sure what the right decision is here. I think it's probably safer to dump and then, well, actually, sorry, he can't dump. No, there's no dump target. I'm speaking out of turn. So he's going to be stuck with this company. It's not a bad company. It just doesn't have much cash. He may sell out of it and try to float something and tempt the other players to take the presidency. Instead, going to invest further in his own company. He buys it from the IPO. If you're going to buy your own shares, you might as well buy the IPO ones. Smurfy has no money. Frankie Teardrop, as a result of the Trestle Bridge, is quite rich. Would have to sell pretty heavily out of the GT. And looks like he's happy to do so. What does he take here? CNR or the QLL? Probably the QLL. As we mentioned, it has some nice synergy with the GT. Instead, he's going to take the CNR. Okay. So I guess he'll be laying a straight dit here and then looking to token somewhere with the GT, cut the map in half. We'll see how that works out for him. Wade, he is selling the HBR, and what does he buy? He's selling out of everything, it looks like, so he's going to be floating the QLL probably. And we do see it float. It's a low float. He needs to be careful. He missed out on all the cheap trains. He's going to spend a lot of this money on his trains and then potentially not be able to afford a permanent train. This makes it pretty likely that we will see a 4 come out before the GT or HBR are able to run their 2s. The CPR, on the other hand, is probably happy for this. Might be able to bypass the 2s and 3s, just pick up a 4 for its first run. It's going to be falling back again. But a revenue of 25 is probably at least equal to the revenue, for instance, of the GT. So not too bad. Grimaldus is passing. He could pick up a cheap share here. I guess you don't necessarily want to pick up a cheap CPR, but you could buy your own market share. Don't usually like that, but getting ahead in share density might make it worth it. Smurfy, no shares for him. Frankie is going to be floating his CNR and Wade buying QLL. So it looks like we're just going to see these two companies float. This will leave probably Wade with priority. Grimaldus has decided to help him out. So I think Wade should probably just pass here. He's going to buy his 6th share. Does he sell it down to operate behind other players? He can't, not really. So surprised he didn't just take the priority there. Grimaldus is going to sell out of CPR. And what is he looking to buy now? His HBR. Okay, is he going to keep this QLL share? He does. So Smurfy Day ends up with priority, and CNR is first to operate. Very curious to see what decision he makes on these double dits. Let's look at his options real quick. This one would help him get to the GT track. This one is probably no good. I don't expect to see this. And this one could potentially help him getting into Saskatoon and eventually down into the GT's track. Hard decision. One of these yellow cities is going to have to upgrade before we see Saskatoon laid anyways. So it's likely that that will happen. Probably the HBR, I think, would be upgrading Wadena. GT may also upgrade Asanobia to help out the QLL. So he does lay the straight track and actually leaves it open for him to loop and head towards Hudson Bay, so potentially setting himself up for an east-west run. He's buying a 3 train. Does he buy 2 3 trains? He does, so these 2 trains are going away. He actually buys all 3 trains. That's very aggressive, and it hurts his GT. I think that the odds of the GT running its 2s was low, but he's going to be very poor heading into these permanent trains. This is very aggressive. QLL going to be forced to buy 4. It's going to deplete most of the capital of his company, but he's less likely to be buying in his private, so maybe that's a little bit less important for him in particular. QLL is, as expected, heading towards the Asanobia tile. A little bit surprised that he upgrades there. It's going to help the HBR more than it helps him, at least in this operating round. HBR is going to have no trouble hitting both sides of that city if he lays 2 tight turn tracks. He buys a 4, there's 1 left. And GT, does he upgrade Asanobia here? Instead, oh, I misunderstood. I had thought that the QLL was Frankie's other company, but of course he's running the CNR, not the QLL. Unable to lay Saskatoon as a result of the lockdown of the yellow cities. And he's paying out for 50. It'll be interesting to see if the Sketch comes out in this game. If it adds a cheap permanent train to the game, it's going to make it a lot safer for a lot of these poor players. But if the Saskatchewan is bought in and we're looking at just 2 5 trains, this is going to be a very hard train rush for these companies to survive. Would require a lot of withholding from multiple players, I think. HBR running his single 3. I expect him to lay 2 tight turns there. Instead, going to upgrade Wadena. This, of course, helps the CPR and is probably less revenue than just hitting Pile of Bones twice. He pays for 100. CPR now is free to upgrade into Medicine Hat, which he does. Expensive track, but the trestle bridge has been bought in, so at least the player's not getting the money, it's just the company. And probably picking up his first train. Buys a 4, so we're now on the 5s. There's actually no company that is easily able to afford the 5. QLL is closest, but has pretty bad track right now, so well, I guess if it lays the double turn or if it lays into Asanobia, might be able to afford it, but it's going to be pretty tight. So this may prove to be a fast train rush if the 5 is opened up here. CNR second operation could get into Saskatoon here Instead, going to upgrade Asanobia. Does he link up the QLL? He does not, and he actually tokens him out, so that's bad news for the QLL player. Running, he actually only runs one train. He has two trains, and he could run them both, as he has two tokens. It wouldn't be that much more money, but it would be more money, so why would you not do that? Hmm. He's the sole investor in the company. I think that he wants all the money he can get. That's very strange. Potentially an oversight. I'm not missing anything, right? It just runs the 4 train. Could run the 4 from Masanobu to Moose Jaw, and then the 3 from Prince Albert to Moose Jaw. Get a little bit more cash that way. Strange. GT running 2 trains. He, with the current track and token situation, can only run one of them, so he will have to give himself a second run. He does link up with QLL and is going to have pretty good runs as a result. Also getting Shaunavan. Is he going to run both his trains? He does, so at least he doesn't make the same mistake twice. Paying out for 160. Only owns 20% of the company, so not going to get super rich off that. HBR. Would like to see him lay these double tights, and he's doing it now. Could have done that last turn. And he runs for 130, a little bit more than last time. Pays it out. QLL. Question now is, does he basically look to withhold and bring out the 5? It's a hard decision. You bring out the 5, you're running 2 trains. Who else would bring out the second 5? It would come down to someone having to float a new company, probably, to push trains. I suppose the CPR could withhold and try and do it. And then there'll probably be a stall before that 6 is bought. But after that 6 is bought, I'm worried there'll be a bankruptcy. I think you withhold for the 5 here. He pays it out. And we will see that last 5 surviving to see another day. CPR probably upgrading Medicine Hat, getting in Western Canada. And just laying the 1 track. Running his 4 train, but only able to hit 3 stops for 90. And if he withholds, it's not going to be enough, so it probably pays out. Into the next stock round, pretty much everyone is pretty poor. Frankie is leading in shares and is leading in net worth. So he may just look to snap up his own companies here and have good revenue with 2 non-permanent trains, especially if we're thinking that there'll be a stall. Smurfy, he buys a QLL. Good revenue with just 1 train in this company. Frankie buying an HBR. Okay. Wademore buying a CNR. Hopefully CNR starts running both of his trains. Grimaldus buying a GT. He could pressure for this presidency. He would force Frankie to sell. Smurfy going to buy another QLL. This is dumpable, but unlikely to see that happen. Frankie is selling HBR, probably sees the GT is vulnerable, and is going to actually invest in the QLL. Still has the option of selling this, but I wonder if Grimaldus is going to pressure him. He is going for the CNR, so actually not pressuring for the GT. And Frankie buys his last share in the GT. Probably everybody be passing, and Wademore has priority. CNR, does he look to start heading down to Swift Current? Instead, heading towards the 00. And is he going to run his second train this time? He does. Okay. So just a small error on his part last operating round, probably. Running for 190, pays it out. QLL floated up in the last stock round. It's going to be operating ahead of the GT now. And looks like he's heading to the off board. Maybe eventually looking to bypass Wadena. But this track is probably not the most consequential. Running for 160 again, and he withholds. Does have money for the first 5, and we will be in brown. Surprised he didn't do that in the last operating round. GT running 2 trains. Still not train locked. I always get caught up by this, but in 1882, the train limit doesn't drop in the 5s. So he could withhold and then look to bring out a 5 in the next operating round with a second withhold potentially. upgrading his home city. Going to be hitting that twice, so an extra $20 of revenue. And he's paying for 180, which he pays out. Actually, 200. HBR, he upgrades Wadena. Surprised he didn't upgrade Pile of Bones, but actually, in retrospect, probably makes sense not to do that because he can double tap it for more revenue than he would get if he was to upgrade it. So running the same track for 130, he pays out, inching his way towards permanent train money, but it's going to be a very slow crawl. CPR, he links up with Western Canada, still running 3 slots, but now in brown, so getting an extra $40 for it. And he's paying for one, he actually withholds, so he will pick up the last 5. And unless somebody floats a company, we probably will be stalling on this 6. However, with some heavy revenue from Frankie, we may see him be able to float the Canadian National and push trains. He should be pulling pretty far ahead here. He has great revenue and is leading in shares. So he would have to sell probably several shares to float the Canadian National. And if he pushes for a bankruptcy, he runs the risk of not winning just based on who, survives. For instance, could Wademore with a 4 and a 5 just creep past him. Probably wouldn't see Grimaldus since he's potentially going to be out of pocket in the 6. I'm not really sure. It's risky. Everybody's so poor, it's very hard to predict who would win if there was a bankruptcy. CNR, he is just upgrading random track, it looks like, and running for 210, which he pays. GT, his second company, Lang Saskatoon, and he is going to be running for 200 and pays that. HBR, one train. Does he upgrade Pile of Bones now? No. I'm not really sure what's going on in the southeast of the map here. I don't know that any of this track is very useful for anyone. He's running for 130 still. QLL now with 2 trains. May need to upgrade the Pile of Bones track in order to get a better run and try to get into Hudson Bay. Looks like he does. Should still be able to run out of Regina twice. And he's going to pay for 290. So getting back into the game that way. He does buy in the Sketch, so that means that we will not be seeing an extra 6. And he has a little bit more cash. Who's going to be getting the Canadian National? Potentially him, but he can't dictate if a neutral token is placed. So there may not be a float. Who does that benefit? I have to imagine a stall before the 6s benefits Frankie the most. He has the most shares. He has the best runs. He's going to be able to hit his cert limit. So he's probably not going to be laying neutral tokens, and that leaves it up to Grimaldus. Does Grimaldus even really have a place he could leave a neutral token? He would have to leave it on there is a neutral token laid. All right, so that really changes that calculus. We may see Wademore bringing out the Canadian National then. CPR, he is upgrading Swift Current, has a little bit of a better run, but still unable to hit 4 revenue centers. Surprised he hasn't been running over to Saskatoon. Paying for 140. So a big question here is, do we see the Canadian National come out to push trains? Wademore has the QLL, which has a permanent train, so if he's able to snag a 6, he's not going to be going bankrupt. And the question is, does he win if someone else goes bankrupt? I think the answer to that is, well, it's hard to say. Maybe. Yeah, I think it's possible. So if he rusts the 3s before they run, Frankie is going to be probably falling on a 6. And then Grimaldus potentially bankrupts with the D. So I think it makes a lot of sense. I think you start the Canadian National here. Sell out of the CNR, hurts Frankie's net worth, and then try and par the CN as high as you can. The risk is that the other players may trash it and hurt your net worth so that when you bankrupt them, you actually lose, but I'd like to see him try. He is selling the CNR and out of the QLL, and he does grab the CN. So he probably needs to trash other players' shares before he fully floats the CN, bring the CNR down all the way to 70 if he can get it, and hope to operate before them, rust their trains, and then also reduce their net worth so that they have less cash for affording permanent trains. At least that's the way I would play it, but it is a little bit risky. Other players could, force you to float the CN to defend their own liquidity and then simultaneously trash your net worth. And just by means of explanation, what I mean by that is if they start buying your Canadian National, you're going to be forced to invest in your own company rather than trashing their own shares, or you'll lose the presidency. So I think that's the correct response to someone trying to bankrupt you. Grimaldis, he is buying the QLL. That's the share that was sold. Smurfy Day, he's buying a CPR, his own company. It does have a permanent train, so reasonable. Frankie Teardrop, he's buying a CPR. This is a share. So I would say so far the response from these players to a impending, train push has been inappropriate. Frankie in particular needs to be trashing other players' shares so that he survives having to buy a six. I would like to see him buying the Canadian National, forcing Wade Moore to defend, and then trashing it. This means that he would have a better chance of being able to operate his three trains and potentially survive another player's bankruptcy. Wade Moore, I would like to see him not buy Canadian National and actually start buying CNR and getting a small increase in his net worth, and then also selling this all the way down as far as he can. Wade Moore instead is going to buy the Canadian National. Okay, not the way I would do it, and he may lose as a result. Grimaldis, he is passing, so this scares me if I'm Wade Moore. I see a player sitting on a ton of cash as I'm floating a company. This says to me, this player may be looking for me to invest 6 shares, and then he's going to buy 2 or 3 and sell them down to hurt me. Smurfy Day, he's going to buy CNR. This can make it harder for Wade Moore to trash the company, and he's not really indicating that he's going to be trying to do that anyway, so fine. Frankie, he buys a GT. This is good news for Wade Moore, buying a share in a company that may be falling back trainless. Wade Moore continuing to buy CN. Grimaldis also passing. So I think this is not going to work out well for Wade Moore if he's not careful. Frankie buying more shares in a company that should be falling back. Wade Moore floating the CN. Grimaldis still passing. Frankie is now cert locked. CN has floated, and I think we'll see Grimaldis trashing the shares here. Does Grimaldis win if the Canadian National buys the 6 and if someone bankrupts? Probably not. Grimaldis is playing in his best interest, though. He wants the Canadian National to operate after the HBR, so he gets one more run. He will have to trash the share 3 times, and I believe he has cash to do that. He does. So I think he's playing this properly, and Wade Moore should have seen this coming, I think. He's actually passing. Wow. So nobody did what I thought they were going to do there. I think multiple players had opportunities to improve their odds. So as it stands, CNR operates, then the HBR. CNR is going to run his 2 trains. I assume he pays out. Then the CN rusts the 3s. GT falls back. It is operating before the HBR. He buys out of pocket a 6, which is going to put him behind Wade Moore. And then Grimaldis bankrupts on the D. So maybe this works out for Wade Moore. The other players had opportunities to change this calculus, but they neglected to do so. CNR laying track that doesn't improve his revenue. And he's running for 220, which he pays out. CN, he is looking to bypass Regina, and he buys a 6. So everything so far is looking like Wade Moore is probably going to win this game. Frankie, he is $600 ahead, but he's going to be falling back in share value, and he's going to have to sell shares and probably mostly his own companies, which may be enough to put Wade Moore ahead. The QLL is going to operate and pay out before Grimaldis bankrupts, so Wade Moore, I think, can take this game. It's going to be close. GT falling back. He is upgrading, and he's selling a QLL that hurts Wade Moore, but minimally, and it actually changes operating order which is going to be potentially enough to mean that Wade Moore loses. That's interesting. So important that QLL operates behind the HBR. And he buys the 6 as it stands. He is very narrowly ahead of Wade Moore. And neither of these players is invested in the HBR, so him falling back doesn't hurt them, but him selling shares very well might. QLL is not ledged. GT and CNR are both not ledged either. So what he sells here may determine who the winner is. But I'm favoring Frankie. He's equally invested in these players' companies. The QLL falling down actually doesn't hurt its net worth. So that is good news for Wade Moore and maybe enough to give him the game. Very close. HBR, he goes bankrupt, and Wade Moore takes it by $7. Incredibly close. So ultimately, it works out for Wade Moore, but geez, that was a close call. I think Frankie and Grimaldis could have potentially changed the game state enough for Frankie to win. I don't think Grimaldis was ever going to win this game. And Wade Moore could have played this slightly differently to make it less close and potentially have less of a stressful win. I talked about that all in the last stock round. I'm not going to rehash it here. So well played, very fast game. And I think that this type of outcome is not uncommon for 1882. There's just not enough cash in the game for players to routinely survive the train rush. It's definitely possible, but bankruptcy is very common. And I have to say, I think bankruptcy is my preferred outcome in this game. The end game here can be very, very long and very boring if nobody bankrupts. So maybe one of my flaws of the game, or one of my less favored features, I should say. Regardless, Wade Moore takes it in a bankruptcy, and we will be back with additional commentary in the future. Thanks for listening.